Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas. And his Catholic faith is day 184. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 132 and 133 of the Secunda Secundae, that is of magnificence, and of meanness, like stinginess. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether magnificence is a virtue. We take the word magnificence from 2 Latin words, magna plus facere, so to do a great thing, literally. Magnificence is the virtue of accomplishing great deeds. It is similar to magnanimity, in that magnanimity pursues great honors. However, magnificence is about the great work itself, which will require great expenditure on the part of the doer, which is why magnificence is normally ascribed to the man of great expenditure, monetarily speaking. This virtue is a quality modifying the irascible appetite, moderating these passions in regard to the great work one ought to undertake, and will require one to spend of themselves and their resources greatly for that work's sake. St. Thomas's brief response to this article is the following, which we will further elucidate in the following articles. He says, to do something great, whence magnificence takes its name, belongs properly to the very notion of virtue. Hence magnificence denotes a virtue. Article 2, whether magnificence is a special virtue. To do something great, in a sense, is what all the moral virtues are about, but the habit moderating our irascible passions in regard to a great work to be done is unique by what it modifies and what it is aimed at, this specific arduous object, this great work, which will require great expenditure on our part. And this quality in the man, modifying the passions and bringing them in line with reason, is what we call magnificence. St. Thomas, then contrasting magnificence against magnanimity, writes, just as magnanimity intends something great in every matter, it follows that magnificence does the same in every work that can be produced in external matter. So the magnanimous man pursues greatness in whatever arena of life he happens to find himself in, but the magnificent man pursues excellence in the work specifically intended to be done. And just like the magnanimous man seeks honor for God's glory, his neighbor's benefit, and the attainment of happiness, so too the magnificent man has his mind on great works for God's sake as well. As St. Thomas concludes, the most commendable expenditure is that which is directed to divine sacrifices, and this is the chief object of magnificence. Article 3, whether the matter of magnificence is great expenditure. Like water is made out of hydrogen and oxygen, the great work of the magnificent man is made out of some great expenditure on his part, normally money or things which we possess which are of monetary value. Think about in your own life the great works that you have undertaken. Did they not come at a great cost to yourself, a great expenditure from yourself, and likely one that was not only taxing to you, but also your material resources? St. Thomas writes here, the matter of magnificence may be said to be both this expenditure itself, which the magnificent man uses to produce a great work, and also the very money which he employs in going to great expense, and as well as the love of money, which love the magnificent man moderates, lest he be hindered from spending much. In other words, the virtue of magnificence is not only about the great expenditure itself, which is required for the great work, but also it moderates the love of money required to spend on this great work. Giving a final word here on how magnificence is distinct then from the virtue of liberality, which is also about the love of money. Aquinas continues in writing, liberality, which regards the use of money in general, and magnificence, which regards that which is great in the use of money, which is why we need these 2 virtues relative to money, and that is because the great work of the magnificent man brings money under this unique formal aspect as a means to the arduous work, the great work, and thus places it under the purview of a virtue likened to fortitude, which is this virtue, magnificence. Article 4, whether magnificence is a part of fortitude. Annexed virtues of fortitude have something in common with fortitude, yet fall short of the excellence of it in regard to the object. Fortitude is the virtue moderating the irascible passions in relation to the threat of death, in the combat of the martyr or the soldier, or even among private citizens. Now, magnificence does not pertain to a fear as great as the fear of dying, but rather to the fear which comes from losing a great deal of one's material resources in the undertaking of some great work. This is a lesser fear than dying, making it a lesser virtue, making magnificence a lesser virtue than fortitude, but an annexed virtue to fortitude, since it does have to do with moderating the irascible passions in regard to some arduous object. Giving the last word of this article to St. Thomas, he writes, although magnificence does not agree with fortitude in matter, it agrees with it as the condition of its matter, since it tends to something difficult in the matter of expenditure, even as fortitude tends to something difficult in the matter of fear. And now on to question 135 of meanness or stinginess. Article 1, whether meanness is a vice. And it's best to begin this article with the last sentence of St. Thomas's explanation, which we can then explain. He writes, the mean man fails to observe the proportion that reason demands between expenditure and the work. Now, the essence of vice is that it consists in failing to do what is in accordance with reason. Hence, it is manifest that meanness is a vice. So the magnificent man does not, out of fear of spending greatly or losing greatly materially, forfeit undertaking the great work. And personally, more and more I realize how necessary this virtue of magnificence is. For all of us would like to probably undertake great works for God and neighbor, but we know it's going to cost us greatly in time, money, comfort, and so we are tempted to pull back. Magnificence moderates this fear by being the quality which habituates this fear under the rule of reason. On the contrary, the man who does not possess magnificence, but the vice of meanness, does not spend what is required for the great work he knows he ought to do. And by not doing what he knows he ought to do, which means acting in accord with reason, he does that which is vicious. Article 2 in our last article, whether there is a vice opposed to meanness. If magnificence is the virtuous mean when it comes to expenditures for the sake of the great work, and meanness is the vice of deficiency, then where is our vice of excess? And that vice is termed consumptio here, or wastefulness, by St. Thomas. It is the irrational throwing away of resources that goes beyond the virtuous mean. Therefore, in response to our article, there is a vice opposed to meanness, the vice of excess, which is called wastefulness. And with that, we close another episode. We have just finished covering questions 132 and 133 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of magnificence and of meanness. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.